Welcome back to the Winter Growers Podcast. Today, my guest is Evan Chender of the Culinary Gardener in Weaverville, North Carolina. Evan started his farm in 2013 and has 2 acres under cultivation, along with year-round production using multiple caterpillar and high tunnels. Coming from a background as a chef, Evan is passionate about variety selection, soil health, crop quality, and meticulous harvest and processing techniques. And 95% of his sales are to restaurants. A big portion of his winter production is radicchio, so we spent a lot of time discussing the varieties, planning, growing and harvesting techniques, taste, and sales success with this incredibly beautiful and delicious winter crop. Evan brings a ton of enthusiasm, dedication, and knowledge to our conversation, and I couldn't get enough talking about radicchio. Today's episode of the Winter Growers Podcast is brought to you by Tunnel Vision Hoops. Tunnel Vision Hoops designs and manufactures do-it-yourself high tunnels, hoop houses, and greenhouses. With an extensive array of products to help large and small growers become more productive, they have 11 different tunnel widths to fit any application and designs to stand up to weather conditions from coast to coast. Tunnel Vision is also a national distributor of parts and accessories needed to build, maintain, or upgrade an existing tunnel or hoop house. Check out their Tunnel Vision Hoops YouTube channel for instructional how-to videos to help build a great high tunnel or hoop house. Here at Four Season Farm, we have 2 movable high tunnels made by Tunnel Vision Hoops, and they are definitely my favorites. To learn more, visit their website at tunnelvisionhoops.com. Today's show is also brought to you by Growing for Market magazine. Which crops will pay back your investment in a hoop house or greenhouse? How does managing a greenhouse through the winter differ from summer growing? And which crops can just be overwintered in the field? Learn all that and more by subscribing to Growing for Market magazine. The writers are farmers, not journalists. They won't tell you how to grow, they'll tell you how they grow, so you can decide what works for your farm. Growing for Market is celebrating 30 years of helping local food and flower growers succeed with articles written by experienced farmers from around North America. Since 1992, Growing for Market is by farmers, for farmers. Plus, subscriptions start at only $30 per year. Whether you do farmers markets, local wholesaling, a CSA, or dream of starting a farm, check them out today at growingformarket.com. Request a free sample print or digital copy from their website, and podcast listeners can get a new subscriber discount of 25% off with the code WINTER when subscribing at growingformarket.com. I think Growing for Market magazine is an excellent and affordable resource for any grower. Now, back to the show. So welcome to the show, Evan. It's so great to have you here today. You are located down in North Carolina at the 35th parallel, Zone 7, which for us Mainers, we would say that's pretty mild for the winter especially. So what's it like to grow in the winter down where you are?
Thanks, Clara. I'm really glad to be on the podcast, so thanks for having me on. Growing down here in the winter is pretty straightforward overall. I've been doing it for 8 seasons down in the Asheville area now, and have things, pretty much more or less dialed in terms of like production and planting and stuff like that. However, we have very unpredictable temperatures here in the winter. So it can be extremely cold. It can be extremely warm. We could get lots of snow. We could get no snow. It can be very, very wet, like unbelievably wet. It could be a dry winter like we're having right now. So the most challenging part about growing down here is just not being able to really anticipate how crops are going to grow, because each winter so far in these 8 seasons has been significantly different than the last. So for example, we recently had like a 10-day spell with no frost and very warm temps, like in the high 60s and 70s. And that was then followed by really cold weather for several days, like over a week. And we're still in that phase now. where we had nighttime temps in the teens, and lots of crops, just winter crops, can't really handle that stress, and either they start growing strangely, like for example spinach, and we can talk about that, how it responds to like high temperature flux, or they basically, a lot of plants put out new growth when it was so warm, and then when it was turned really cold, that new growth had never really experienced any frost, and a lot of that new growth got basically fried by the frost, and a lot of our cut and come again greens, or some of them at least, we had to just cut back because it was like too complicated and complex to try to sift out the damaged leaves. So yeah, it's basically, if we have a normal temperature kind of winter, it's fantastic and can be really productive, but that doesn't really seem like it's something that happens down here in my experience. So it's always one thing or another that we're kind of trying to manage or deal with throughout the winter period of growing.
Yeah, I think that's really important distinction to make too, because, for us here in Maine or anyone located more in more northern climes, like we always probably fantasize like, oh, it must be so easy down south to grow. And there you have your own specific challenges. And one in particular of what you just mentioned about that, like hardening off. And if you don't get that period of cold weather for those crops, they can actually sustain a ton more damage when you suddenly get those cold temps.
Yeah, and even in tunnels and even with row cover. So it's really like, there's really nothing to be done at that point.
Right. Yeah. So like the best planning that you have, you can't always control the weather.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. So I'd love for you to begin with your farming background, your story. Like, where did you grow up? How did you get into farming? I know you also have worked as a chef, and I'd love to hear, kind of those first real interests that you had, especially as a kid.
Sure. So I grew up in the suburbs of New York City, north of the city. I had like a real suburban type experience growing up. I don't think I ever mowed a lawn until like I was in my 20s. So that's kind of crazy. Never used like a weed eater until I was out of college, etc. And I've always been like really into food ever since like I was very, very young. I've had a passion for food. It's really been the thing that I've gravitated to the most over anything else really in life. And so what kind of got me into experimenting with growing food was my love of food and my love of like cooking. And in my like late teens, I started to realize that if I wanted to make the best food, I basically needed the best ingredients. And one of the ways to get the best ingredients was getting really fresh and high quality ingredients. So I started buying stuff at farmers markets in the towns around where I grew up, or maybe in New York City at some of the green markets like Union Square. And then that kind of led me down another road of, well, I could have this, but if I really wanted stuff that was even fresher and different varieties that maybe I can't find at a farmer's market, how am I going to get this? I need to start growing it myself. That just was the logical like next step. And so I started one summer like growing, tomatoes and peppers in like terracotta pots on my back deck. And then that was like, I think when I was 16 or 17, the next year I built some raised beds. And then the year after that, I dug up like 1,000 square feet of my backyard, put a deer fence around it, and started growing stuff in that space. And that was where I learned a lot, just from experimenting with different types of crops and different types of, soil amendments, the whole thing. And that's kind of where I started to develop, like, I guess you could call it my style of growing. And then I have very limited amount of like direct learning experiences from other farmers. I did a 6-month apprenticeship at Stone Barns in 2010, right after I graduated college. And I also did some interning on a farm in the Hudson Valley while I was in college. And pretty much other than that, I'm mostly entirely self-taught. And that's been a blessing and a curse, because being self-taught allowed me to really develop, I think, a style of growing that is a bit outside the box in a good way, though. It's like very niche, and it's not necessarily replicable from anyone else. But also I missed a lot of learning and direct kind of knowledge infusions from experienced growers. And that has meant that learning certain things has taken longer for me. And also it's been a lot of learning from my mistakes. And, that's a good way to learn, but it takes more time. And also there's more potential for problems or things that decisions that I regret. I have plenty of those, especially with regards to setting up my farm 5 years ago when I bought property. So I don't know, I'm like pretty happy where I'm at now with regards to like my skill level, but also there's still so much that I don't know and don't have any experience with. And so it's kind of like I'm trying to basically find a like field manager that can bring some of the skills to the farm that I don't necessarily have. And, we could then kind of co-manage and lead the farm to like a more successful and stable place. Even 8 years into the business and 5 years into having my own property, I still feel like I'm kind of flying by the seat of my pants, and I don't feel like I have a specific and coherent system that I can just rely on year in and year out. And that's partly because every season I've pretty much made big changes to the farm in terms of like growth, or there's been outside factors like COVID that have completely changed how and what we like needed to grow. So there's never been like a year where I felt like we're just going to do it like last year, and I feel confident that we'll just do it like that. And so that's been challenging, but it's all part of the process of farming and having to wear many hats and even have to kind of figure out ways to become good at things that you don't feel very confident in or feel like you're really interested in. Like there's so many things about farming that I just don't like, but I have to do them and do them well in order to have a successful business.
Yeah, and you have a really strong background as a chef. So I'm always so curious with that connection of, the chef farmer. Where do you feel like your experiences as a chef have informed your farming practice?
I think definitely cooking, for a living, and also just having a passion for cooking for many years, has allowed me to develop my specific style of crop selection, size of harvest of certain things, kind of individual side of farming. Cooking has really helped me develop how I want to present things, crops to restaurants, which is my main sales outlet. So it's how do I want them to look when their cases are opened up by the restaurants and by the chefs, and what would a chef be looking for with regards to product, in terms of quality, in terms of size, in terms of variety. Chefs always want new things and special things and rare things. And so that was a big component of my business, since I started, really was kind of trying to make myself stand out by having a unique selection of crops that looked really appealing to chefs, but also obviously they need to taste great and be really clean and just be better than everything else, like better than the rest. It needs to always be up on another level, because the prices we charge have, reflect that. And if it's not the quality that we need it to be, the whole thing kind of falls apart, because at that point, you're just ripping someone off. So that's really hard to do consistently and it takes a lot of labor and it's very challenging, but it's the backbone of the Culinary Gardener, and it's kind of the way that we're going to continue to do things. And each year we, get a little bit better at that kind of consistency. Consistency is really hard when you're doing an incredible variety of different crops. Sometimes I wish that I could just grow 10 crops a year in really large quantities, but my market wants really high variety, and so that's what I'm giving them, and it works out. People just keep buying stuff from me, and they keep buying more from me as we get more productive and put more space in production. And being a chef and cooking has basically led me to where I am today with regards to what we produce and how we market it and how we sell it.
Yeah, and I would imagine that the communication piece and that sort of mutual understanding is so important with those clients because, from my experience working with chefs, I mean, they have sort of like, it's the spontaneity and creativity that they have is kind of on the fly. And, for them to be like, oh, I really want this, but then not always understanding how long it takes, what it takes to get that product. So it seems
Certainly.
like you can kind of mitigate that really well with chefs in the communication. And, like how do you sort of temper their enthusiasm a little bit and be like, that's not realistic. I can't get you that, overnight.
Yeah. So basically, most chefs don't ask me to grow certain things. I might get like one of those a year or two of those a year. But at this point, the restaurants that I work with, I've been working with for many years. Some of them I've been working with for 7 or 8 years. So at this point, they basically don't ask too many questions, and they just expect me to offer them a large variety of things that they want, and then they're going to buy them. And so it's really up to me to deliver and kind of have an idea of what they want and when they want it, how long they might want it for. Having a consistency in terms of production of certain crops is extremely important because restaurants want to put a certain crop on the menu, and they want to put it on the menu for maybe they want to do it for 8 weeks. And so if you have it for 8 weeks, they're going to buy it for all those 8 weeks or even longer potentially. But if you don't have it, then you're not going to be able to sell it to them. So it's just kind of like a loss. So on a small scale, it's really hard to do really high diversity and also have really good consistency with our top 10, let's say top 10 crops. But yeah, it's pretty much up to me to give them what they want and offer them, the quantities that they want and all that stuff. And I've been able to do that for the most part. And when restaurants see that I'm able to do that, they tend to start just buying more from me because of being consistent, cropping year round and selling and having a good selection of stuff year round. We took last week off, and that's the first year that we've taken a week off of sales since I started the business. So it was okay though. It was great. And I plan on doing that yearly moving forward. But they want stuff all the time. And so we're there for them and have stuff all the time. And then they respond, they reciprocate by buying a lot of stuff from us.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, I think it's really important for, other farmers to hear that, like, as a farmer, you can really dictate, your sales and, for your customers, and that it doesn't always have to be the reverse. Sometimes it seems like farmers feel like they're at the mercy to what the demands are of their customers and clients.
Yeah.
So I think it's cool to see how you've really created a business model where, you kind of get to call the shots on that as long as you're providing the consistency and the quality that they expect.
And the certain things that I know that they want from me.
Yeah.
In certain seasons.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I'd love for you to kind of give us the layout of your farm, what it looks like today, infrastructure, kind of, production, acreage, just kind of the basics.
Sure. So today we have 8 caterpillar tunnels, 14 by 100. We have a 24 by 96 high tunnel, unheated. We have a 30 by 96 high tunnel that's also unheated. And we have a 30 by 48 greenhouse that is heated. And we also have a propagation greenhouse that's heated, but we do not do like microgreens or any sort of production of stuff that we would sell direct from the prop house. So that's not really a part of our production, but we do grow transplants in it year round that we're planting into these other tunnels, basically. We have a total of about 2 acres in production, during the growing season, the main growing season. And we have a tractor that we can currently only use in this rented field and the bottom part of my property that I own, because the current layout of the original field is basically based more or less on like a stone barns or even on the 4-season farm model of just tight. We have 3-foot bed tops outside and 2.5-foot bed tops in tunnels with basically a 1-foot wide path. So it's really tight production but also really productive. But in order for us to change it to like a tractor scale, we would have to do a whole lot of rearranging, and we just haven't been able to get there yet. We have like a wash area that's also like a storage shed. The wash area is like an open bay with only like 2 walls on the long end. So it's not the greatest place to process, winter vegetables when it's really cold, but most days get above freezing pretty soon after the sun comes out. So even if we do have a cold night, like we can still wash stuff out essentially outside without it starting to freeze on us.
Like you guys.
Yeah. But like, you guys are washing inside, which is probably more pleasant overall than doing it outside when it's like 40 degrees and windy or whatever. But if it's a nice day, yeah, that's cool. So we have a whole different variety of crops in these tunnels right now. And as crops come out of production in the winter, we are replanting these beds or direct seeding them, basically the week that they come out, just like we would be doing in the tunnels and in some of the other areas of the farm throughout the year. And our main winter crops are radicchio and forced radicchio, which we're going to talk about a lot, chervil, wild arugula, spinach, different kind of mustard greens or Asian greens like tatsoi and bok choy. We grow land cress. We grow claytonia or miner's lettuce. Lots of carrots. When we do a nice, really cool Chinese mustard greens called bao sin, which are like heading mustards that develop nice dense heads in cool weather. We grow a little bit of mosh. We do like 1 bed of mosh probably a year. So not too much because it's pretty labor intensive to pick, but it's really delicious and a few restaurants really like it. We go really big on rutabaga, which is kind of random, but it's such a guarantee that it's going to be like productive and super hardy. So we just leave it. We did 3 beds this year. We just leave them in the field and pick every week off of what's the biggest. And we still got a lot out there. We've sold a lot already. But it's just like if it's cold, it's fine. If it has a crazy temp flux, it's still fine. It just starts getting bigger, but then you want the cold weather to really make it taste good. So it's actually, right now it's tasting really awesome because we just had like some really, really cold weather, but we don't really store anything. We leave everything in the ground and dig, as needed with like carrots and with rutabaga. And then we do some crones, which are also known as Chinese artichokes. They're like a small, strangely shaped tuber. that it's a perennial. It's like a sunchoke in terms of how it grows and how you dig them, but very, different look, mild taste, but chefs freak out about them because they're very rare and unique and have a pleasant and versatile texture that they can utilize in, various ways. But they're very labor intensive to harvest. I mean, several human hours to get 10 pounds, maybe like we're talking like 8 human hours to get 10 pounds. But we sell them for $25 a pound, but it's still like doesn't really work out, but it's kind of a fun thing to do if we have time to dig them. And then we go really pretty big on green garlic, which is like a really late winter crop for us. So we grow a lot of garlic. We sell a little bit of it and we put most of it in the CSA, like the heads. And then we have a lot that we crack just for green garlic because we pretty much make all of the money from garlic from green garlic. And so we'll plant beds in tunnels, 3 or 4 rows per bed, depending on which kind of variety we're growing and stuff. 1-inch in-row spacing and plant it early December, and it's a 90 or 100-day crop. So it's actually like a pretty fast crop for winter growing for us. And we're picking it early March when lots of other things kind of have finished out for us. It's like a great new thing to have in a time of year where it's kind of hard to have new crops that aren't the same ones you've been selling since November or December. And we make a lot of money on it because it's super early and it can be extremely productive in like a 100-foot bed. It could easily be like, we sell it for $12 a pound, but we can easily generate like $2,000 from like a greenhouse bed or a high tunnel bed or a caterpillar tunnel bed of green garlic. So it's definitely really significant, but it comes in at the end of winter.
Yeah, so I was going to ask how many of these crops are actually out in the field without any protection or minimal protection, and what's exclusively in the high tunnels. I'd love to hear kind of a breakdown of that.
Cool. Everything that's outside right now is covered with 1-ounce row cover that we leave on unless we have like a crazy temperature swing, like a high swing like we had 2 weeks ago. So if it's like no frost and really warm, we're taking the 1-ounce row cover off. But right now what we have outside is rutabaga. We have all of our like field radicchio, like stuff that we planted in like August or early September, and it's like basically ready in late December and early January. So we have that out in the field. And then one thing, we have some overwintering spinach out in the field that's getting way too big because of the warm temps that we had, but still looks okay. And then we have one thing I forgot to mention is we do a little bit of like late kohlrabi. So we transplant kohlrabi in late September, early October, and we get, we started picking like the plants a couple weeks ago, and it's like, it's probably like 3.5, 4 inches big, the stem. So, and it's super hardy. So we can just leave that under 1-ounce row cover as well and kind of pick the biggest stuff off of it every week. And the temps that we get generally are not cold enough to kind of ruin the texture of the stem. And then in tunnels is everything else. So that's the only stuff that's outside right now.
Okay, so that was just to clarify, spinach.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'll go through them again. So in tunnels, we have some overwintering radicchio that we refer to as a grumolo. So it's more of a rosette form of radicchio, not really like a heading type. It makes many layers of small leaves, and it's very beautiful. And when we plant it in a tunnel, we start picking it around now. But we also plant some outside for like February and March harvest. So we have like a few beds outside, and we have a few beds in a tunnel that we'll start picking soon. Chervil is in the high tunnel, wild arugula, spinach, tatsoi, bok choy, upland cress, claytonia. We got 1.5 beds of carrots left in a high tunnel. The Chinese mustard greens are pretty much done. They can't handle it too cold. So even in a tunnel with row cover, if it's really cold, they kind of get kaput, so we harvested them out. Mosh. Mosh is out in the field uncovered.
I was going to ask.
And it looks fantastic. We harvested some this week. It's just unbelievable. No like leaf margin necrosis from winds and cold weather. It's just such an incredible and inspiring winter crop.
Yes.
And then
it's so incredibly cold hardy, but at least I think the only problem with it is it doesn't weigh anything.
It doesn't weigh anything. We charge $32 a pound for it because it just doesn't weigh a thing. Yeah, and that's why we don't grow a lot of it, because it's a very, it's time consuming to harvest and clean, make sure it's clean. In Europe, they sell it dirty, so that's chill, but no one would buy it from me dirty here. So yeah, that's the only thing that's outside that's uncovered. Rutabaga is covered with 1 ounce row cover, and then the green garlic's most of that's in tunnels, but we do have a couple beds that are overwintering to kind of fill in the successions of it, so that we can start harvesting from the first stuff in tunnels, and then we have stuff we just actually planted earlier today in a tunnel, and then we'll have a couple beds outside that are going to hopefully come in after we're done with the tunnel stuff.
And then what's the difference? You said you have one minimally heated tunnel, and the rest are unheated. So what would you be growing in that minimally heated one?
We have citrus trees in there that take up
entirely different.
that take up a quarter of the growing space in there. And we have a couple other kind of unique non-hardy crops in there. We have a curry leaf tree. We have a special type of oregano that's not hardy enough to have outside. It's a Greek variety called Kalateri. Get it from Richter's Herbs. I think it's the best oregano I've ever tried. In Greek, that name Kalateri means the best. So that I agree with it. It's super good. And I mean, we sell a little bit. We sell a bit of it. Maybe we sell it to one place, and they might buy in a year 20 pounds. So it's not a lot of the space in there, but it is a cool crop. And then so in the other beds that are available, we throw in just generally either things that we are transplanting that will only take up a small amount of a half a bed, because the beds in there are only 30, they're 40 feet long, I guess, because there's some buffers on either end. And we have some radishes in there, because I don't really find radishes to be a guarantee in terms of hardiness in unheated tunnels here. So we have radishes in the heated tunnel that are almost ready. So things like that. And then I just like kind of doing fun things in there. It's not really enough space to be super productive, since kind of part of it is already taken up by other fun, not cash generating things. Not too much, at least. But what I want to do is, we always do early potatoes in tunnels, but I find potatoes grow extremely slowly when it's cold, and actually they're easy to get their leaves frosted, even with row cover, if they come up and it's warm and then gets too cold. So we're going to do early potatoes in the heated tunnel, and hopefully get a few beds of them in. And just, your favorite variety, Charlotte, that's one of the ones that we're really into right now. And we grew a bunch of it last year. So we're going to do early Charlottes in our heated tunnel, 2 or 3 beds worth. And, hopefully have them, we'll probably have them in April. We'll plant them in a week or 2. We're green sprouting them right now in the prop house.
That's great. Yeah. They're definitely I think the best crop you can get early in the season.
And I love new potatoes. I freak out about them. So
yeah. And chefs
I'm just into it.
Yeah, and I imagine chefs just go crazy for them too. So
yeah, and if they come in April, I'm going to charge $6 a pound.
Yeah,
you can just charge whatever you want.
Yep.
If they're really nice and you're bringing them in an unbelievably early situation for a certain crop, like a potato.
Yeah. And what about, you mentioned citrus trees. Is that something that you hope to expand in the future, or is that just kind of a little passion project?
It's a bit of both, mostly a passion project, but we sold some fruit this year for the first time. We sold 50 or 60 pounds of Meyer lemons and some.
Wow.
We also sold some yuzu. So it's kind of fun to sell some local citrus and, see that certain chefs are really excited about it. I kind of market it towards like the best accounts basically because it's so limited. But I would like to probably sell some more, but really it's super fun to have homegrown Meyer lemons and mandarins and then some unique citrus varieties too in the winter when the main season is. So I have basically like probably 5 or 6 months worth of like citrus that I can go out and pick in the greenhouse and use in the kitchen. So that's just really exciting and fun. We also have some citrus in the one of our unheated high tunnels. We have sudachi and yuzu, which sudachi is like a hybrid yuzu. They're very cold hardy. They're hardy down to 0 degrees Fahrenheit. So they do just fine in an unheated tunnel. I wouldn't really feel confident putting them straight up outside, but it's cool that we don't have to have those in a heated tunnel.
What about figs? Have you ever played around with figs?
Yeah. So I thought that, zone 7, I would be able to grow figs outside. In downtown Asheville, there's lots of mature fig trees, but the difference is that like in neighborhoods, all the houses in the neighborhood in winter are giving off so much heat that it creates like a microclimate where the figs are actually okay. It's probably like turns into zone 8 almost for like a residential neighborhood with like a fig tree. And then there's like a house, a couple 100 feet away or whatever. But out here, even though I'm only 10 miles away from those places, I just don't have, my neighbors are far away from me. And so even putting them relatively close to my house, I just didn't put them close enough, but they die back every year. So I've never gotten like a Breba fig crop, which is the stuff, the figs that are produced on like 1-year-old wood, and getting like a decent, like kind of main crop is just hard, when they just die back to the ground every year because they're not that big. And so there's not that many figs that set. I'm tempted to put them in like a tunnel, but I'm not going to because I know that it's going to be a terrible decision because of how established they can get and how huge they can get and how much kind of their roots will get into our other growing space. Although Ben Hartman has an inspiring way to grow them. He kind of like espalieres them in a row in like a bed in his greenhouse. I don't know if it's heated or not, but he kind of has a bed of them and he keeps them very, very tidy. And it looks really cool, but I still don't think I'd probably do that because it just, I don't know, maybe eventually, maybe one year, but
yeah, farm goals, right?
Yeah, it's a lot. And I know that it would be like not that many figs anyway, like not like I could sell like hundreds of pounds over the course of their production. Yeah. But who knows? But yeah, I love figs, but I've had a very unsuccessful venture trying to get them to grow here. I have like 8 fig trees outside around my property, but I only get like a handful of figs, and some of them have never even produced figs. I mean, I had like this Violet of Bordeaux, which is apparently like a very hardy variety. And this year, after like 4 years, it grew to be like 8 feet tall and looked fantastic, had many, canes. And I've never seen a fig on that tree or on that, shrub. So.
Okay, so let's talk about radicchios because I know it seems like you do quite a bit and you seem to have a favorable climate for growing a lot of radicchios through the winter, forcing them to. And yeah, I'd love to learn, well, first, what inspired you to grow them, and how you're growing them, what you've learned over the last few years of growing them, what you'd advise to, farmers who want to try to grow them. Yeah, what do you got? Okay, let's start with the first question, and then
sorry, the questions.
I give you a lot of questions.
There's a lot of stuff right there and plenty to mention. But so give me the first question.
Let's just start with what's your passion for radicchio? Where did you learn about it, and what inspired you to grow it on your farm?
Cool. So I think I first got excited about radicchio. I had no idea about all the varieties of radicchio uh, at first, you know. And then I think one year, it was probably in 2014 or 2015. I saw Castelfranco radicchio in a Wild Garden seed catalog, and I just couldn't believe that you could have such a colorful and richly colored, beautiful like crop that would mature in the like darkest days of the year, in the depths of winter, essentially. So I tried, I bought the Castelfranco seed, and I think they also had like a late slot variety of Lusia radicchio, which is similar to Castelfranco, also variegated, but has slightly different growing habits. And I planted both of them. I think I planted both of them too a little bit late. The Castelfranco didn't really develop the way that I wanted or expected it to, but the Lusia, like there was at least a few really well formed, well blanched heads, and just seeing the pink like speckles and stripes on the pale, yellow white background of the leaf, like that hooked me. That was it. I just couldn't believe it, how beautiful of a crop like radicchio could be. And I thought it was so cool that its season was when it was really cold.
Yeah. Especially in winter when everything seems so drab and, not colorful. It's incredible.
Exactly. And then, so that's what got me inspired to, start experimenting and learning about all the different radicchio varieties. And then I would say what got me interested in trying to force radicchio was seeing stuff online and seeing stuff on Instagram. One of my close friends, Chris Field of Campo Rosso Farm, I would give him a lot of credit with inspiring me to try forcing different radicchios, because I just saw the stuff he was doing with the Tardivo 6-7 years ago or whatever, and I don't really remember exactly how we connected on it and became friends, but I probably reached out to him asking stuff about it and whatnot, and he's given me a lot of advice over the years on how to do those things. But it was I had never seen a forced Treviso Tardivo, and I think when I came across it online, I was like, I gotta try that next. There's no way I'm not trying that. That is so beautiful. It's looks delicious. I gotta see what that's about.
Yeah. Yeah. And for listeners, if you're not familiar with some of these names, definitely go to Evan's Instagram page and look at his feed, because he has a lot of them pictured there, and they are just incredible to see. The colors, the shapes, the Tardivo it looks like squid-like, right? It's got
it sure does,
tentacles, and it's so cool looking.
And then some of the forced radicchios really, really look like straight up flowers in the winter. And that is just so exciting to kind of clean, because the radicchio that we force, when we're cleaning it up, when it's ready to be processed and sold, it looks terrible. All the outer leaves are either completely dried up, or they might be starting to rot and are really slimy. And then you start peeling away these nasty layers of leaf, and then to have revealed to you a beautiful little forced Castelfranco or Gorizia that just literally, once you remove the outer grossness and slime, or rotten or old leaves that are kind of keeping it contained, it kind of opens up by itself sometimes. And to see that happen right before your eyes, it's just an incredible and exciting process. And I also want to note that most radicchio that we grow is open pollinated, and a lot of the radicchio, in general that people grow is open pollinated. There's the hybrids mainly focus on Chioggia types and Treviso types, And we do grow hybrids of those, but 80% of what we grow is open pollinated. So it's really cool to see the different, how each plant is different. Like literally, we have this late Verona that we grow as a grumolo that I'm looking at right now, and none of them look the same. They're all their own special, beautiful, different, different form of the head, different cup, like the leaves are cupped in different ways. The way that the leaves are growing and how many layers they have is all different. And it's just super exciting to see all the variation, and that all of it, or most of it at least, is like really incredibly beautiful.
Yeah. So where are you getting your seeds? What's has that changed over the years? Where are those seeds coming from?
Yeah, some of the seed I buy from American seed companies, like Adaptive Seed has really great varieties, has some really great varieties of radicchio, especially the one that that I was talking about is a type of Verona that they have called Arca, which is really, really nice. I also buy some seed from Uprising Seed, especially now that they are connected with an Italian seed company that breeds radicchio called Smarties. So it's a really easy way to access Italian seeds. And then also Osborne Seed Company has a lot of radicchio varieties from another seed company in Italy that they're bringing in. So there's great selections there. I buy a lot of the seed directly from these seed companies in Italy, especially because it's easier to get you can get pelleted seed directly from these companies, but the stuff like that Osborne has and Uprising has is all raw seed. So it's like, it's a lot of the same varieties, but it's just a little bit easier to sow when you're doing a lot of it, and doing a lot of, seeding in cells.
Yeah.
But it's in the last 2 or 3 years, basically, there's been an amazing increase in access to really good varieties of radicchio in the US versus like a few years ago. I was buying all my seed directly from Italy. But now sometimes it doesn't make sense because it's like, could be a lot more money than just buying it from an American seed company.
Hey, podcast listeners, we're going to pause for a moment to hear from one of our show sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Rimol Greenhouses.
Whether it's tomatoes to market, flowers in the spring, or your family's harvest, growing in a greenhouse protected from the weather provides the right environment that you need for a harvest that you can count on. Rimol Greenhouses are designed for durability and offer the quality that you need to grow productively year-round. Visit rimolgreenhouses.com to get a quote today.
Here at Four Season Farm, we use Rimol greenhouse models to support our year-round crop production. Today's show is also brought to you by Johnny's Selected Seeds. Johnny's Selected Seeds is a proud sponsor of the Winter Growers podcast. Since 1973, Johnny's has supported farmers and gardeners with superior seeds, tools, and information to help ensure their growing success and feed their communities and families. The research farm is the heart of Johnny's, where they trial thousands of varieties and tools every year. The breeding program uniquely focuses on introducing varieties that meet the needs or solve challenges that mixed market, small farmers, and avid gardeners face. Visit johnnyseeds.com for innovative new varieties and time-tested favorites to grow this season. You can also browse the online Growers Library for a wealth of educational resources, including the Johnny's Winter Growing Guide, which features tips on planting and harvesting into the shortest days of the year. The employee owners at Johnny's look forward to growing with you. Now, back to the show. Now, could you kind of break down, I think it would be important to talk about, sort of field-grown radicchios that stay in the field and that you harvest, through a long extended period through, the winter months, but then also the varieties that you force. And there's obviously some crossover there of the same varieties. And then your techniques for forcing. It'd be great to kind of get, because I know, it's complicated. It's a really long growing process for some of the forcing ones. But it'd be great to kind of hear how that works on your farm.
Sure. So a lot of the radicchio varieties are differentiated by days to maturity. So we grow I think 30 or 35 different varieties of radicchio over the course of our season, which is mid-September to mid-March. We have radicchio every week for that period of time, and for most of it, there's several different types that we have. So we grow Chioggia radicchio. These are all different types, mostly differentiated by their place of origin. They're named after like the towns they were developed in a lot of the time. So we grow Chioggia, Verona, Castelfranco, Luzia, Treviso. We grow the Treviso Tardivo, which is the forced stuff. We grow Gorizia, which is also forced. It's from really northeastern Italy, close to Slovenia. And we grow the Grumolo, which is the overwintering rosette type. And then we grow various pink radicchios. The Rosa del Veneto, I think, is their general name. And so we grow all different varieties that have different days to maturity. If we had enough space, we would probably plant them more of them at once. Like you could plant your whole radicchio crop more or less like in 1 week and just have a succession based on the DTM basically. Mm-hmm. But we just don't have the capacity to do that. So our planting season for radicchio is between end of July and early October. So we have a long planting window, and that gives us, quite a long harvest window as well. And also with all the different types that we grow, allows us to have stuff coming in at all different times of the season. But also it's important to note, I think, that some radicchio can be considered like a storage crop. So you can harvest certain radicchio and store them in your cooler for like 4 to 6 weeks without really losing any quality. You'll probably have to take off a couple more layers of leaves, but other than that, it's basically the same thing. So there's certain types, especially the hybrids, they come in incredibly uniformly. And there was 1 week where we harvested 550 pounds of radicchio because it was ready and needed to come out, because a lot of these hybrids don't have good field holding. They get over mature, the leaves start to crack. It's not a good scene. You can lose a lot of it. So, and we sold that over the course of probably some of it, at least, like especially the Chioggias, we sold that over like the course of four weeks, and it looked amazing. In the 4th week, it looked the same basically as it did in the 1st week. So
kind of like a cabbage, right?
Certainly, it's just like that, which is really cool. And so, like for example, right now we have a late Luzia in the field, but we also started the season with a very early Luzia. So we have the same general variety right now as what we did in mid-September, but it's a different variety that we planted later, and it grows more slowly, basically. And generally, the later, longer DTM varieties have more cold hardiness. So those are the ones that we are picking right now. And what we have in the field right now, besides the Luzia, is we have several beds of a really beautiful late Castelfranco called Lucrezia that you can buy from Osborne Seed Company. It's like at least 100 days from transplant. So it's like a really, really long, it really doesn't get good until the end of December. But it's super cold hardy, incredibly beautiful, and it's looking really good right now. And we're going to get a bunch of snow over the weekend. So I got my crew harvesting a bunch of that right now.
So this is January, just to make sure everyone's clear. So you're harvesting this through January, basically.
Yes,
yep.
Outdoor
yep.
radicchio. As long as we don't get a crazy snow, which we are going to, it's like we're just picking the stuff that's the biggest every week. It's really cool. This variety especially does a good job at putting on new growth, even in very low temperatures. So as long as the soil slightly warms during the day under the row cover to like be in the 50s, it's basically like field forcing. It's not actually photosynthesizing. I can't like say this for sure. It's just what it seems like it's doing and what I know about radicchio. I don't think it's photosynthesizing. I think it's basically using the energy stored in its roots, because they have, like, radicchio has a fleshy root, like a basically like a carrot. If you were to direct sow it, it would look like a thick white carrot.
Or a parsnip, yeah.
Yeah, or a parsnip, yeah, for that matter. And so, yeah, it's putting on new growth all the time when it's not super cold. And so that's how we're able to have like a pretty long harvest window. And it's super, like kind of stable. It's not going to just start bolting in like a warm spell. It really needs to get through the winter and have like consistent warm temps for a while to start bolting. And the late varieties are generally also pretty bolt resistant as well, as long as they're planted at the right time.
And so much of
that,
does that have to do with I was just wondering, I'm curious, does that have to do with light, right? It's like photoperiod influences on the varieties.
Yeah, so one thing I've really begun to understand over the years is radicchio and also puntarelle, which is another type of chicory that produces little hollow shoots that you eat generally raw. Very delicious, incredible. I love it. One of my favorite things. But yeah, they're sensitive to daylight hours. And you know, that's something that's very interesting because there's not like, I mean, there are obviously like onions are sensitive to daylight hours, but I don't really know other leafy greens that are particularly sensitive to basically the latitude that you're growing them at. So that's been a learning curve because I'm 10 degrees south of radicchio country in Italy.
Okay.
At least. So it's different growing them here than it would be in Italy. And I kind of have had to figure out the best timing for certain plantings. And it's been a lot of trial and error and kind of figuring out what works best in what slot, especially with all the varieties that we're growing.
Yeah, no, it's so tricky because, you know, here at Four Seasons Farm, I mean, we're at the 44th parallel, which is essentially the same as, you know, Veneto region of Italy, right? But our cold temps are so much greater. So we'd have to utilize high tunnels and minimally heated high tunnels to grow all these. And that would be really, you know, just resource intensive, and it would be difficult to justify it economically. Right,
that's true. And actually we get cold. We're colder than northern Italy where a lot of this stuff grows. It's rare that they would get temperatures below 20 degrees like ever. Not ever, but like, you know, regularly in the winter. And so they're able to leave everything, like all their late stuff and overwintering stuff, just outside, uncovered. No row cover, except for maybe when a few nights that it gets really cold, they'll pull it out.
Yeah.
But yeah, so even it's interesting that I have colder, like low temps, but I'm also like much further south, right?
Yeah.
So it's an interesting combo to try to figure out based on like how they grow it there.
Yeah.
I can't really take too much from what they're doing. I need to kind of see generally what is going on and how they do it, and then try to apply it to my climate.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's what makes it so challenging to do. So,
yeah.
So I just want to hear more about the forcing because, you know, so here at Four Seasons Farm, the only thing that we've played around with is Belgian endive. And, you know, it's fun to do, but it's such a long process because, you know, you sow the Belgian endive or the Witloof in May and we harvest it in late October. We store it in crates upright, you know, trim the roots, trim the tops off, put them in the root cellar, and then bring them out and put them into bins of water and, you know, force them to grow the chicon that we harvest. But it's such a long process. And, you know, like the amount of money you can actually get per chicon is so little that it's difficult for a small farm to justify that. So I'd love to hear your system, how you've sort of improved those efficiencies to make it more profitable.
Sure. Well, to start, it's pretty damn similar to what you do in the end. I've done Belgian endive once, but I did it in slightly a different way. It was really awesome, but it was just the yield wasn't there for the amount of work that went into it. I think the radicchios that we force give slightly, you know, a better yield and are slightly more productive for that reason. But basically what we do is we forced all different types of radicchio because I just wanted to see what would happen and how they would do. And What I've kind of settled on in terms of like the main ones that we force is Treviso Tardivo. We also force Gorizia because those two really are not marketable unless they're forced. So if you're growing these crops, like, and you're not forcing them, you're not going to get really anything very desirable to eat or sell. And then we also force some Castelfranco, and we also force some pink radicchio. Although we're kind of moving away from forcing those last two as I get better at just growing them in the field.
Yeah.
Because basically what we used to do is force the ones that didn't head properly, because if you force like an unheaded late radicchio, it's going to make a nice dense head. So it was kind of like a way to salvage the ones that weren't successfully headed. But as we get better at growing it and have more consistency with the yield and weight, it's actually, that's something that is more profitable to just sell from the field than to bring in and force, and then sell for a much higher price because of just the loss that you get from forcing in terms of like yield and because of the amount of extra work that's involved.
Yeah.
So I think we're leaning towards just really focusing on Tardivo and Gorizia moving forward. And so what we do is we, have a couple different varieties of each one. One of them slightly earlier, one of them's slightly later and more cold hardy. And we start digging them after a couple frosts. So the first ones we'll transplant middle of July. We'll transplant, and then we'll start digging plants. Generally, it's like early, like first or second week in November, and it's very manual. We don't have any sort of mechanization for doing this, so we just have digging forks, and we dig as much of a bed as we need that week, so we dig up the entire plant. Since we transplant them, we don't get like a nice taproot like a parsnip. We get kind of a wild spread of fleshy roots. So we trim those roots just so that they're tidy and that they don't take up so much space in the crates that we pack them into. So we basically trim them to like 4 inches length of root and like probably 2 inches, 2.5 inches wide of root. And that's sufficient amount of energy to have a successful forcing experience. And so we pack them vertically into crates. We use these like kind of crates that restaurants get like pickles or cilantro. They're taller than bulb crates and more narrow, but it's just the ones that we are able to basically easily get from restaurants for free because they don't really reuse them. So we pack them into there, and you need to make sure that they're all standing up straight, nothing like fell over in the process, because you really cannot have the growing point of these plants be wet and in water, because we're forcing them in water. It'll just rot. So we use hydroponic like ebb and flow tables that you can get for like $200 or $300. And then we fill them up with a few inches worth of water, and we place the crates directly into that water. And then we cover the tables with like a very heavy shade cloth, like an 80% shade cloth. Some other folks like black out their whole greenhouse with like a tarp or something, which is probably like a, easier and better idea. But we're also growing transplants this time of year as well, so we're not able to really black out our prop house to do that. And we are forcing them in the prop house. And you want to kind of maintain roughly like a 55-degree average temperature over the course of 24 hours. That's ideal for the slow force without developing excessive amounts of rot. I found that once you get above 60 degrees, the plants can start to rot extremely rapidly, because think about it, they're all packed into like a crate. There's water around the roots. We leave a good bit of room in the crates for airflow, but still a lot of the leaves that are on the outside of the plants are like already a little bit rotten or old or whatever. So rot can really be something that can come on fast and ruin what you're trying to do. So it's important to have the temperature stay like below, like average temp stay below 60 degrees. And we force them for 3 weeks. So, we'll plant something in mid-July, dig it up in mid-November, and then have the first round of it in early December. So it's like, what is that? Like almost 5 months of growing, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's a cycle of 5 months, which is certainly shorter than the Belgian endive that we did here at Four Seasons. Yeah,
but since we're not direct sowing it though, you can kind of add another 30 days to that, so it's almost more like 6 months.
Yeah.
From the time that we seed it in cells. But yeah, so 3 weeks, and we change the water once a week.
Okay.
Although I know people that change it more regularly than that, but I've found that there's no difference in like quality with leaving the water there for a week. And then when it's ready, when it's 3 weeks, we'll lift the crates out of the water. And it's one of the things that I get really excited to see is the roots that are in the water. They sprout new, fresh, beautiful white roots that are sucking up the water. And it's just a beautiful sight to see. And it's like, that it's a successful forced crop when you see those like abundant white roots. And then we'll remove all the outer leaves. And what we'll find in the center is like a beautiful forced heart of chicory, which is very crispy, like very low fiber, no fiber really. So it's not like tough to eat. Super crispy, super juicy, not bitter, some sweetness, very, very palatable, like very easy to eat, I think, and extremely tasty. And then we'll trim the root off. So there's just like a little nub of root. That's just the style that they do it in Italy. The root is edible, so some people eat it. And so we trim it off and just have like a little, 1 inch kind of stub of root left on it. And then we wash them and dry them. And that's it.
And then they show up on plates of at fancy restaurants, right?
Yep. And then, it's really cool because like each one looks different, and it's exciting to I love cleaning it up. Like I love being part of that process. When I was away last we'd and I got back, we'd usually clean radicchio on Monday mornings, but I wanted my crew to wait until I got back so that I didn't miss a week of being a part of that, because it's really exciting to see just how beautiful these plants are coming out of being forced. And it's just really exciting and really cool to be a part of that process of cleaning them up and seeing how successful or maybe not successful it was due to certain circumstances. Like we had a rough week when we had really warm weather, because the average temp was probably more like 65 or 67 even, because they're in the prop house. But even with those sides rolled up, it's like warmer in there during the day. So if it's only a low of 50 at night and it's like a high of 70 during the day and it's in the prop house, you just can figure that it's going to be, at least significantly above 60 degrees for like an average temp. And we had lots of loss.
Yeah.
So it's like, that's the weather coming in again for our region. That's a tricky challenge to manage sometimes with forcing, because you really need something more stable. But it's just kind of our setup, and the way we do it, we don't really have another choice. I mean, I would love to build like a forcing shed, where we could like keep it minimally heated, or even like you could do it probably with like a cool bot or something. That would be like a really good way to do it. But we just don't really have the space on my property to set something up like that. And nor do we really have the, I think, wherewithal to spend a bunch of time doing that over the winter. Harvesting in the winter, I mean, I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about this, but it's such a big time suck for winter when you're trying to do like other things that you weren't able to get to over the course of the season, like cleaning up and new projects and, new infrastructure and all the purchasing and seed ordering. Like I'm having a hard time right now getting the seed orderings all done, because I feel like I needed to be helping with harvest so that we can like get through these things.
Yeah. No, that's the constant challenge of four-season farming is there's never enough time to do what you have to do. Yeah. So what, I guess, do you find that these radicchios are profitable, especially the forcing, like the system you have? Do you
So
find that is
yeah,
profitable?
I have no idea. It's so hard for me to figure out any sort of profitability
Yeah.
on pretty much anything. I was just listening to like the No Till Growers podcast with his name's Richard
Wiswall. Yep. Uh-huh.
Wiswall, and because I'm like I really need to start kind of figuring out profitability at least for like my top 5 crops in sales, but yeah, I have no clue, to be honest, how profitable forced radicchio is. I do know that it's like something that I really love doing. So it's really fun and exciting to do. And that's one of the main reasons why we do it. And also, that it's at least good cash flow. So I have like on my 2-acre farm, I have 4 full-time year-round employees and 1 part-time year-round employee. So I got payroll every 2 weeks of the year, all these extra costs with having a pretty large crew through the winter. And so if it, even if it's not profitable, it's at least bringing in a good bit of cash every week. So we charge $18 a pound for it. Pre-pandemic, we charged 20. It's the only crop I think that I've ever reduced the price on because it's just hard to sell really high value crops in like January and February when restaurants are significantly slower. And something I realized this year is I really need to push more production of the forced radicchio in like December because December's really busy in Asheville. Lots of tourists coming through for the holidays and stuff. And people are like, they could have bought so much more than we had available and then just dial it back for like January and February when, we're not selling as much. Like this week we sold like 35 or 40 pounds, but the week of New Year's we sold 90. So when we're selling 90 pounds, that's pretty awesome. I mean, that's like, I don't know, what is that, like $1,700 or something? I don't know, that's not right. Anyways.
Don't ask me to do math on the fly.
90 times 18. So yeah, that's like a lot of cash. But with half of that, I don't know how worth it is at half of that in terms of like labor, because labor is like relatively similar for half of that. I mean, we are digging half the amount, let's say, but in terms of like the time spent cleaning it up, it's not like significantly more time. It's maybe like to clean up twice the amount probably takes an extra like 45 minutes or like an hour.
Yeah. And
so yeah, it's probably more profitable at a larger scale, like most things are, right?
Of course. But you also do a CSA. Do you do one through the winter as well?
No, we our season is 6 months from early May to early November.
Okay.
It's possible that we might do like a winter CSA in the future, but last year was kind of the first year of a real normal CSA. We did like a COVID CSA the year before. So I'm just still kind of figuring out CSA and production, and I got to prioritize my main account, which is restaurants. And so I've been wary to like have too many members or to do a winter CSA because I just was unsure if it would take away too much production and kind of be limiting to the chefs I sell to. But, as I get more familiar with like how to do a CSA, and especially doing a CSA like more in the shoulder seasons, it could be a great opportunity to move through more crops. Like, for example, we have so much Claytonia right now because it's just such a good grower in low light levels and super hardy. But like, we can't sell, I don't know, Claytonia is not apparently the sexiest winter vegetable, according to chefs. So like, on a busy week, we might sell 20 pounds of Claytonia, but on like a slow week, like this week, I think we only sold like 10 or 12. So, but we could sell like 40 a week.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, I'm always curious about like, with a farm that's so restaurant focused, crop focused, if you could have enough interest in individuals for those kind of crops, right? Like what would they do with certain things that they maybe have never heard?
Like if it was went into a CSA?
Yeah, like, just having the unusual type crops that you're growing, like would most of those, customers know what to do with it? And how much more education would you have to do to help people understand,
Yeah. So we grow enough, I think, like normal crops in the winter that it would be pretty easy to do a winter CSA. And actually I have like a few neighbors or like old friends that pick up a share every week throughout the year. So through the winter, I do like 2 or 3 CSAs a week, like every week in the winter as well. And what I've been putting in them is pretty normal stuff like spinach, carrots, rutabaga, kohlrabi, not too much radicchio because like, people, I think normal people are like, I don't really want radicchio like all the time. Because I think Americans in general are like adverse to bitter flavors and they're put off by them. But I think something like Claytonia, I put in those shares already. And I think that's like a pretty easy one to eat because it's sweet, it's mild, it's a salad green. So even though it's different and like something that someone might not be familiar with, they can use it in like the same way that they would use things, other vegetables that they are very familiar with. So I love that. I love when I can have something that's different and unique, but also approachable and like something that people understand because they can relate it to something else. I think that's the easiest way to sell stuff and to stand out. And I do that a lot with just variety selection even. So like picking a really particular variety of a certain crop that looks different or tastes different or it's a different size than the standard, but it's something that is not going to be off-putting because it's familiar to most people. And it's a great way for restaurants to also make sure that they're able to sell things because the people that are sitting down to dinner are not like weirded out by it because they can relate to it in some way and feel like safe ordering it, let's say.
Yeah, no, definitely. Gosh, I have so many other questions, but I think we're at our lightning round at the end of the show here. So are you ready to dive into those questions?
Yeah.
Okay. We could probably do like a round 2 here, and an addendum to this podcast because there's so many other questions I have, especially.
Let's do it. Yeah,
okay, great.
Cool.
Well, yes. Well, let's jump into the lightning round questions, and I'm sure there'll be some other interesting things here too. So, okay. So, first question: what gets you up in the morning?
The crops. My crops need me, and at least I think they do. I'm very visual, and I do very close observations of all the crops, and I take a close look at pretty much all my crops at least once a day. In the summer, it might be twice a day that I'm looking at everything, inspecting it, what's going on, how is it growing, how is it responding to, being foliar fed or what have you, So I'm excited every day to get outside and get on the farm because I want to know what's going on with everything that's in the ground. How's it doing? How did it survive last night's 16-degree night? Oh, it looks okay. That's fantastic. Oh no, I think something's wrong with the spinach because spinach is very sensitive to high temperature fluctuations. So we have wonky new growth in a lot of our spinach now because it was so warm and then it was so cold. It almost looks like a nutrient deficiency. But I'm familiar with it enough now after several years of dealing with these situations to know that it's just stressed out essentially. So yeah, I got to see what's going on, how everything's doing, and I'm just really obsessed with my crops to like a probably relatively unhealthy degree.
Well, no, it's the power of observation. It's so key as a farmer.
Yeah, that's how I've learned like almost everything I do is observing and making connections between things and like understanding growth and stressors by, just taking really close look at things and seeing how crops react to all different types of situations.
Yeah. Do you need to include any coffee, though, with that getting up in the morning?
Yeah, I actually don't drink coffee. I just drink black tea. But yes, caffeine is But I do drink caffeine and eat breakfast before I get outside.
What is the hardest part of farming?
I think for me, the hardest part of farming is how much I have going on such a small scale. It's really hard. It's been really hard for me to develop coherent and like efficient systems because of how intensive our production is and how like we're just maximizing it so much, especially like in tunnel areas where we do about like 5 or 6 crops a year in each bed in tunnels. That it's really overwhelming and just hard for me to make sure everything is going the way that I want it to go. And it leads me to basically be doing a lot of extra work myself. And it's becoming really challenging at this point in my career to be putting so much of myself into the farm to make sure that it's successful and all the crazy different and various moving parts are moving the right way and there's no issues. Basically, we have so much demand and such a limited amount of space to crop on that it feels like every bed of crops needs to be like unreasonably productive in order for us to have the yields that we need to satisfy the demands and also to generate enough cash to be like relatively profitable. I mean, for 6 months, I have 6 employees on 2 acres, and that doesn't include me. So there's 7 of us working on 2 acres. I mean, I don't know other farms that have that much labor. And so I don't necessarily, I don't think the way that I'm doing things is, the best way to achieve certain goals. I think that there's way more efficient ways of growing, but my market and my space has my style has kind of led me to this current situation, but I am starting to, understand that it's not necessarily like sustainable, like for me personally in the long term. So I'm slowly making changes, but like I mentioned earlier in the podcast, learning from mistakes and being self-taught, it takes longer to kind of get to where you want to be. And my like farm is so complex and like my kind of vision for like production and sales is also really like high and complex. So it's just really challenging to pull that off constantly. And so what the farm is going to look like in the future is going to be different than it is now, but I can't say specifically what are going to be the big changes. But I think one of them that I've figured out over the course of 2021, is that I think I need to decrease my diversity somewhat and spend more time focusing on crop profitability and understanding which crops are really not worth us putting the labor into. So a big one is flowers, edible flowers. In 2019, we grew like 25 varieties of edible flowers over the course of the year. And in 2022, we're only going to be doing 2. So, I think the pandemic reduced people's desires for like just garnish type things. And people wanted to spend their money more on real crops that were unique and delicious, but not just fluff. And so we've already started to kind of navigate more towards the production of like real vegetables and doing them in larger quantities. But our diversity is still like unbelievably high, and it's not efficient. Having all these different crops growing throughout the 4 seasons, it makes harvesting slower, makes consistency less successful because, not everyone is exactly familiar with harvesting every single crop because we just have so many that some people just might not ever harvest it until like we need them to harvest it this day, and they've never really done it before. So there's all these different complexities that I've kind of created for myself with everything that I've done. And I'm just realizing that it needs to become less complex and more replicable for my employees to kind of do efficiently without necessarily me making sure everything is running super smoothly, like all the time.
Yeah. So then what is your favorite tool?
I think my favorite tool is a collineal hoe.
Really?
Also, yes, it's like when I started my business on 8,000 square feet in someone's backyard, I was able to cultivate all my production every week. I would be able to cultivate within a week after transplanting stuff, and I just had no weeds. I had literally like no weed pressure, and I've been chasing that ever since I moved to like a larger scale where we just haven't been able to maintain that level of weed management. And I just also really love the look of like a freshly cultivated bed, and that's the hoe that I started using many years ago, and that's the hoe that I still love. I don't really like using a scuffle hoe. I'm super tall, so the the way you use a coho is much easier on my back than like having to bend down and get the angle right for like a scuffle hoe. And I just really like it. I also really like a hori hori knife because we transplant 90% of what we grow. And so we're doing a ton of transplanting all the time. And I think that the hori hori is a great tool for creating that transplant hole. And it's just a good way to kind of maintain a consistency with regards to like everyone on my crew planting every week, like large quantities of plants.
Yeah. What is your favorite smell and your least favorite smell on the farm?
My favorite smell on the farm is citrus in bloom. So when my citrus trees are blooming, mostly in early spring, like March, the perfume is like nothing else. And it's very nostalgic to me. It's such an intense aroma. It brings me back to the first time I smelled a citrus blossom, which was in the greenhouse like when I went to college. They had a greenhouse and they had a lemon tree, I think, in there. And I was able to do some work in the greenhouse here and there, and smelling citrus blossoms now always brings me back to that moment that I first smelled that aroma all those years ago. And it's just a delicious smell, but it's also it's more than that for me at this point. It's like kind of, brings me back. And my least favorite smell is really easy. It's the smell of decaying brassicas in the winter. My crew removed all of our brassicas while I was gone on vacation. But basically, we would mow them and incorporate them into, our soil. But we've had like 4 out of 5 years here, we've had black rot on our brassicas from one thing or another. 2 times it was brought in on seed that wasn't, screened for black rot. And then one time it was, or maybe 3 times it was that. And then one time it was because we didn't properly remove crop debris. Because you know how woody a broccoli stem towards the base can be. I mean, it's not going to decompose for like a couple years unless it's completely like buried in the ground. And so we've had disease issues with incorporating brassica debris. So we have to remove all the plants by hand. And so they sit there until we get around to them. And they really were stinky, especially once we had that cold, that warm spell. It just like perfumed the whole farm, and it was rough. So I'm glad they're out of here now.
How do you turn off farming, or can you?
It's really hard for me to turn off farming. Yeah, I know that's a huge challenge that I'm working towards being able to be more effective at doing. Because I just put all my efforts towards it, or almost all my efforts towards it. I have so much invested in it that I really want it to be the best that it can be. And it's also like a mental thing, like I just want to be doing the like better and better and better all the time. And so I really put a lot of myself into the farm. In terms of turning it off, like I guess vacation is effective for me at that. But I just don't get I get to go away like once a year for like 6 or 7 days. So, or maybe, I could probably go away for like 8 or 9 or 10 or whatever. But that is like being away from the farm, I think, is the answer. I'm able to turn off farming when I'm away from the farm, but I just don't get to be away from the farm that much. I live like 30 feet from like my high tunnels. So I'm just looking at it all the time, and I really like that, you know. But if I have free time, I'm going to do something on the farm. And I think that's where there's like a big problem, because I really would like to not do that, but I'm just driven to, you know, if it's like a weekend, and even if it's a weekend like in November when we're not really doing weekend work, if we didn't get to like cultivating some beds that really we're going to miss the thread stage window, or we already did, but like they're still kind of small and I want to just like get that cultivated, I'm going to go out and do it like on a Saturday and spend a couple hours cultivating beds. And it's like, I love doing that, but it's also like, I need to kind of create more boundaries, like
Yes.
with regards to that as well. And like be able to let go, you know, be able to just be like, okay, I'm not going to do that today. We're going to do that next week. Like when we have everyone.
Yeah. I think it's a common problem for many, many farmers, especially ones who live on a farm. So you're not alone. So what do you love besides farming?
I love cooking. I love cooking with crops that I grow. I love going outside and harvesting crops and bringing them in, and they're like an hour since they've been picked. They haven't been refrigerated. The flavor, and it's exhilarating to taste stuff that's so fresh. Even in comparison to stuff that's a couple days old, it's like a unique difference, I think, and something that I really love about farming in general is being able to have access to incredibly high quality and diverse selection of produce all the time. And I think that's part of the reason that I grow so many different things. Like I'm not going to go to a farmer's market and like buy melons if I want them. I'm just not going to do it. So if I want to eat like delicious melons in the summer, I need to grow them. We make no money on melons, right? But like I still grow them because I want to be able to eat them myself.
Well, what do you love besides farming? I was going to say, do you run? Do you surf?
Oh,
you?
I also like being in nature. I love being in nature. It's very grounding for me. So walking in the woods is being around big, older growth trees is like a really grounding thing for me. So I love getting out into we have a national forest like rather close by to where I live, and I love getting out into that at various times of year, especially in the fall. We had a really beautiful fall foliage season this year, and that's like that's a big way for me to relax and unwind, and you know, it's being off the farm, so it's really true that that's a really effective tool for me to manage the farm.
Who is an inspiring farmer or land steward you'd want to have as a dinner guest, either living or deceased?
All right, you might hate this, but I'm serious when I say this. It's your father, Elliot Coleman.
It's okay. People have said that many times before
on the podcast.
Oh yeah.
All right, cool. So I'm not the first one. I'm glad about that.
No.
But he's truly been. He was. I mean, your father inspired me to basically farm and to farm in the winter. And it was just a really formative experience for me when I first heard him speak. It was at, I know when it was in 2008, the first year of the Young Farmers Conference at Stone Barns. And he was the keynote speaker, and he spoke mostly about growing food in the winter. And I just couldn't believe that that was possible, to grow stuff through the winter and to have really vibrant and like good looking stuff, you know, not like it's ruined in the winter and it's like barely surviving and you're able to eat it though, but it was like just incredible quality in the winter. And you know, that led me on a specific path that has taken me to where I am now. My senior thesis in college was focused on growing crops in the winter using like low tunnel hoop houses. And I did an experiment at the garden at school, and that was directly, you know, inspired by Elliot's, you know, what he's developed over the course of many years. And I also think that it doesn't even stop there. I mean, the quantity of tools that he's developed that's like integral to most small scale farmers, operations is just incredible. I visited Four Season Farm in 2010 and got to spend a few hours with him. But it was like in the winter. It was in the early December, and it got dark pretty quickly because I just didn't get there with enough time for daylight. But we did spend a few hours together and chatted, and I would love to do that again, for sure.
Well, good. Well, maybe we'll have to arrange that one day.
Cool.
What is your learning edge, and where do you feel like your abilities or understanding as a farmer could grow?
What does that mean, learning edge?
Like where you think, you're constantly learning and need to, improve what you know. I mean, it's that sort of edge of like your knowledge base.
So I think my learning edge is probably could just divide it into two categories right now. One of them is soil health and like maximizing production while maintaining like a really good soil and like a soil that can produce lots of production and yields. But like building up the biology and kind of having it be something where currently, like, to get the yields that we're getting, we're doing a lot of fertilizer injecting, and then also foliar feeding. And I basically want to get to the point where I don't have to do that, but I'm still getting similar yields. We have a challenging soil here. It's really dense and heavy, and parts of the farm can easily become anaerobic. So it's like a very not ideal like agricultural soil. But we've built it up in many places to a good level, but I feel like we have a ways to go in order to be where I really want to be with regards to soil management. And then I think the other thing is like mechanization. I never drove a tractor until I bought one last March. And so I think that for things that I'm unfamiliar with, I tend to be kind of afraid of them and afraid of like getting into that and like learning about it. So I kind of like just avoided tractor farming forever because it was like I was intimidated by it. I didn't really understand it. And at this point, I sort of understand it. I see that it's not like so scary, obviously. But I still don't necessarily know how to maximize the efficiency that a tractor can bring to a farm and with regards to like implement selection and just like management of implements and management of the machine itself, all that kind of mechanical stuff, troubleshooting those things is where I feel like I really need to develop a stronger set of skills.
And you're also kind of going against the latest trend of no-till by bringing a tractor on board, right?
I suppose you could say that.
Hey, there's no judgment on my part.
But, I think we're still trying to focus on soil structure and soil biology, even with the tractor. So we have a reciprocating spader that is, very, very light on the soil compared to like a rototiller. You can spade 12 inches deep and you're not necessarily killing a bunch of earthworms even because most of the clods are coming up in giant pieces and it's only the top few inches of the soil that's getting broken up by the harrow on the back of it. But other than that, you're just creating like good air in the soil. And I mean, you are inverting it. So that's something that is, still like a challenge if there's like weed seed buried, or if you're then burying weed seed that you're going to bring up in a few years or whatnot. But, I don't think we could really be doing what we're doing now without any sort of mechanization, I think.
Yeah, no, that's a challenge. Well, last question here. How will you grow old farming?
I don't know yet, but I know that I will. Or at least I feel pretty confident that I will. I think that I need to start putting money into like a Roth IRA for sure. It's something that's been on my mind for a few years now, but I've just been pouring all my profits back into the business to like try to create a more efficient farm. But I do need to start saving for retirement, and I do need to find some employee who's going to be dedicated to be working here for like a long period of time and can potentially, take some of the pressures off of myself. But essentially, I'm going to need basically some really high quality employees to be able to grow old farming. I think
it's hard to do it on your own.
That's going to be pretty integral. Yeah, and to be so as invested as I am now, and as like obsessed as I am now, I feel like I need to feel like I can really trust other people to accomplish like what I'm looking to accomplish in the farm and in the business.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, maybe we'll continue this in a future part 2 one day. Great.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Well, thank you so very much, Evan. It's really, this whole interview was jam-packed with so much great information, and I'm excited to listen back to it as well, because there's so many questions that I have, and I hope to glean more answers, from your responses too. So I really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you very much as well. It was really fun, and I'm glad to be able to share some of that info with your listeners.
Thank you. Today's show was produced by me, Clara Coleman, with support from No Till Growers.